Sometimes in life we can be beset by a terrible sense that we are judging others at all times, falling again and again into a sense that no matter how hard we try, we keep having terrible suspicions of others, thinking they're doing bad things, and having these judges leap into our minds, having our minds latch onto them in ways that make us very distressed. We have these thoughts come into our mind and we seem to entertain them and then worry whether we have committed grave sins of judging others. The good news is that in many ways, it is unlikely that in the mind of a person committed to doing the will of God, that this is actually what is happening. Instead, by getting an explanation, a real understanding of what is going on, liberation can be almost automatic. So, what is happening? In the mind, fear has a great power. Fear has a power of amplification. When the mind is afraid, on high alert, looking for danger, it amplifies normal sensations. It amplifies normal perceptions. It focuses on normal thoughts and passing impulses and makes them launch into consciousness with a greater intensity because of the importance that the scared brain is putting on those feelings, thoughts, emotions, stimuli because of the sense of danger. When things are thought to be dangerous, the mind is on high alert for them. How does this principle apply to this problem of this type of judgments that seem to beset our minds, these suspicions that seem to beset our minds? Well, the truth is that it is very, again, unlikely that these are actual judgments, actual suspicions, actual anything. If one examines oneself, one's actual attitudes are likely to be, if one is a sincere follower of the teachings of the Catholic Church and of Christ, in general, one would look at one's own real attitudes as opposed to those that are besetting one's mind and realize that one would forgive these things. One understands these things. One even intellectually has a complete, almost a complete attitude of being able to find ways to dismiss these things and has charitable attitudes underneath or in the superior part of the soul. So there is this real way in which the person is not actually dealing with this issue. That should give us at least one clue that something else is going on. If one doesn't really have this issue, other than that the issue seems to have you and keep latching onto you and besetting you at every few minutes and every time you're actually spending time, maybe try to work through the judgments. If you're actually spending time working through these judgments and these judgments are still launching themselves into your mind, it's likely, extremely likely, that this other thing is happening, which is that the perceptions of, or the passing thoughts of judgment are being seen as dangerous by the mind because they are being perceived as being sins. Therefore, the mind, the subconscious mind, is generating more of them because one is looking for them through a simple psychological effect. And also, they are given great importance because the mind is looking at them with this type of hypervigilance, and it is amplifying them through fear. One thinks that there is a consent to these thoughts because in one way, when they launch into the mind, there is probably some sort of sensation of them being very blasted into consciousness, coming into the mind, occupying the mind, and then being essentially chewed upon by the mind, as if the mind is engaging with and sensing a kind of enjoyment. And it's interesting that this sensation is probably not a sensation of an enjoyment as in something that is truly really enjoyable to the soul, but it seems as if there is a real kind of consent, a sense in which the mind is almost experiencing a kind of latching on to the sensation, a kind of immersion in the sensation, a kind of release of a kind of connection to the thought that feels as if it is consent. And this may be, I can estimate that this may actually be some type of an overlapping effect in the brain's system of the amygdala. This is just a guess that I have, that that the amygdala may be responsible for both reward and looking at some types of things that it is afraid of, and so there may just be some overlaps in that neural circuitry, which leads to this sense of consent. But that being what it is, it could be true, could be not true. What it remains is that what is really going on is that there is a sense in which possibly there is some appetite or some concern within the person about this, some real appetite or real concern, whether it's some type of something may respond to some way to this thought. But the thing really is that the thought is being amplified by fear. And when we realize that the fear is what is placing the thought into, so to speak, the field of consciousness, and that the actual consent, or what we feel is the entertaining of that thought, is actually a minimal component in the background compared to the launching of the thought upward into the foreground, so to speak, we realize that this thought is not actually a real temptation to judgment. So how could we maybe better understand this? Because this can seem very technical. But start to begin to look for these things. Don't despair that this is your actual condition, because what I think is happening, again, is that these thoughts are seen as very important. The more one doesn't want them, the more they pop up. The more significance one gives them, the more they become part of one's life, until it becomes something that becomes besetting to you at all different circumstances all the time. And it's almost as if you're thinking normal things, and all of a sudden, bam, 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 there's all of these tag-along thoughts. All of a sudden, you're in the midst of this thing that seems like you're in this mire of judgment. And your whole life seems to be that it's trying to get away from this sense of judgment. But the thing really, I think, to remember is, again, that this is because this is your main concern. If you examine yourself, you are very afraid of this, that you are afraid of sin. It's not that we fear sin because of that it offends God in a context of a true filial fear. It's simply a psychological or carnal fear, an actual anxiety about the sin, not a sense of some type of awe before God. It is simply a psychological process, simply something tangled up. And so this is very important to remember, because this means that we are not having the problem we seem to be having. The problem that we are having is that we think that these thoughts are significant, and the brain, thinking they're significant, assigns lots of significance to them, releases stress hormone about them, gets us stressed out, and we start almost to have these thoughts arise again and again as almost flashbacks, probably because of the effects of the neurotransmitters that are involved, which make these thoughts, which kind of attach to these neural networks and make them seem to kind of flash into our minds, because the brain, again, is thinking these things are important. So, how do we get out of this? The truth will set us free. We will know the truth, and the truth will set us free. If we know that this problem we are having is not that we are genuinely struggling with the issue of judging others, we are not genuinely not genuinely having suspicions or these things. We are really struggling with the fear of these kinds of thoughts, the fear that we will sin, an actual anxiety about sin, which is causing thoughts to be amplified in our mind, and that because we are giving significance to this entire issue, it is becoming part of our lives through this misunderstanding. Once we realize that this is all that is happening, that these thoughts are not an indication that we have an issue judging others, that these thoughts are not an indication that we are committing sins, we can then realize that these thoughts, which we usually take time to obsess on and say, hey, okay, did I commit a mortal sin? Did I commit a venial sin? How much weight was there in the type of judgment? This and that. All these different kinds of review become unnecessary once we realize, and actually the process itself doesn't need to even start, or doesn't start, once we realize that we aren't even being beset by judgments. We are not experiencing judgments. We are experiencing something else. We are experiencing thoughts that are amplified by fear. I hope this makes sense so that the truth can set us free, and that these thoughts are just amplified by fear. They are just if there is the fear is launching this kind of thought into our minds, it's kind of just a type of thing popping into the mind. And if you again look at your real attitudes, you don't think these things in your real self. It's just this thing, and it seems hard to convey because the issue is so simple. It seems, and is there anything that we need to do about these thoughts? No, we just need to understand what they are. We don't need to fight them. We don't need to do this because once we really know, oh, we're safe. These thoughts are not dangerous. Even if these thoughts pop into my mind, they're just passing thoughts. Even if there's a sense of their amplification that is not consent. Even if there is some type of engagement with the thought, even that you're actually concerned about it, you're actually worried about it. Really, you're probably experiencing doubt, fear, these type of things, not judgment. And even if you do engage with the thought a little bit, it's probably really the inferior part of your soul. Or even if there is, it's probably you're so absorbed in this line of thinking that you're probably not even fully consenting to it because you're probably just kind of caught in your head and going along. And so this is the last part I'd like to, so that's the main thing I'd like to say. I'm going to make another little video that's going to explain some other aspects to this.